Hey y'all, it's Dr. Shelly with HETV, and no, this is not a nursing video. I was doing the Debt Snowball boot camp this weekend, our first one, where you get together and everybody puts money on the table and we collect it and pay off people's debt, the group's debt. And so someone in the group, when I was explaining why we have to really get our shit together as a people, somebody in the group asked, well, what is apartheid? And you know what? I was really glad they did, because I need to never take it for granted that everybody knows their history or anybody else's history. I mean, some people don't even know our Black history in America, much less the history of South Africa. So this video is an attempt to answer that question. And here we go with they not like us, but then again, they are. So it's a spin on Kendrick Lamar's they not like us. But when it comes to apartheid, they are exactly like us. They are exactly like our Jim Crow history and slavery and the whole nine. It's kind of interesting, right? So let's dive really deep and get through this video so you have a backdrop to why I keep telling you to write down these three names and do your homework. Elmo, you know who Elmo is. He's that one down in DC running everything and firing everybody. Elmo. Peter Thiel. Yes. The third name, David Sachs. These three used to be called the PayPal Mafia, honey. And these three have something in common. They were all raised up in the South Africa apartheid ways. So therefore, they are now running things in America. Many of them finance people's elections. For example, Peter Thiel finance J.D. Vance's Senate race here in Ohio. And you thought it was by some kind of weird coincidence that Cheeto Puff chose him to be the VP? No, it's all a plan. It's absolutely planned this way. That's what I got to get across to you. That's what I got to get in your head. This stuff is very planned. And what happens with they not like us, but really they are, Jim Crow 2.0 is basically being brought here. Again, it's resurfacing in a different way, but it is resurfacing. And it's resurfacing through the works and the efforts of three apartheid fellas, right? Okay, so they're very familiar with that apartheid. They know what that was all about, and now they're here, and one of them is getting all our personal information, our demographics, so he knows if you're Black or you're white, and the first fired and the last hired, you do the math. We also have to keep in mind that the Jim Crow 2.0 is basically Project 2025 kind of thing. And in case you lost the connection, it was J.D. Vance that wrote the foreword for that part of that Project 2025. And so if you look at who he follows and what they say, they're very much about white supremacy. So when we look at what's happening right now in America, we have apartheid, which is similar to our Jim Crow back in the day. And this is apartheid in South Africa, similar to Jim Crow in America back in the day. But Jim Crow 2.0 is headed our way again. So when you look at this, you have to go back a little bit in history. I know you guys hate history, but I minored in it, so you got to stay with me. Just like us. Just like the United States, the South African country went through its own British and Dutch colonization, right? So colonies, making colonies. What does colonization of a country mean? It means taking over that country and having the people in the country pay taxes to another country. So Britain, right? We were colonized as a country. United States was colonized. We paid taxes to England, and then came the Tea Party in 1776 and on and on. Well, here we're talking South Africa is being colonized by the British and the Dutch, just like we were. There was always a need for cheap labor, just like we had in America. Even though slavery was banned, just like it was in America, and here slavery was banned in 1834, of course with us it was 1865, the discovery of diamonds and precious metals in 1867 led to even more British people coming, doing more colonization of the country, and the need for more cheap labor. In order to get that cheap labor, the British taxed the free natives, blacks, very heavily. They really taxed them so heavily that they were forced to work in the mines, the diamond mines and the gold, to get gold and diamonds, to pay their taxes. They couldn't keep up with the heavy taxation, so consequently they lost their land. So much of the land was seized even way back here in the 1800s. And then what that did was it served to create the lowest economic class ever in South Africa, which happened to be the black folks. So the natives, which they were called, the black natives born there, will die there. These black natives now have the lowest class economically, and that served to lead to racial segregation. Makes sense, okay? Now, they did at that time recognize like 3 racial groups. The whites were like the Afrikaners, and I need you to know that because you'll get confused if you think, well, Afrikaners, well, that would be Africa. No, Afrikaners were like the early Dutch that came and tried to settle South Africa and wanted to continue slavery even when it was abolished. And the Europeans, right, the British. And then, so that was the white, right? And then you had the colored, which was a term that was used, and I believe that's where our use of the word colored came from. But this was actually Asian, mixed race, Indian, and then you had, of course, the natives, which is black Africans. In 1910, there was something called the Union of South Africa. Here, they immediately passed laws to increase racial segregation, and just like we did during Jim Crow. And the laws were passed to restrict land ownership by blacks to just 8% of the country. And they designated this as land reserves. Reservation. Remember what we did to the Indians? We took the worst land that you could hardly like grow anything in, and we kind of took that and designated that as the reservation and gave them that land. They're like us. And so this was the history, if you will. Now, if we come up a little bit closer to now, let's head on over to 1912. In 1912, we blacks in South Africa were not just going to sit here and let you just do all these horrible things to us. There was some pushback, some fight back. And so initially, the African National Congress was created in 1912, in which their target was really passive resistance, in order to kind of convince Britain that, we need our rights, all that kind of stuff, sending different documents over to water to Britain, and okay, this needs to stop. We need to be given our equal rights. Yeah, that didn't work, you already know. And so what happened? Well, during this time of you trying to claim your rights, the police force increased. We had even encouragement of civilian attacks on these black natives. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Yeah. In 1936, there was a repeal. Like, get this in your head, because this is 1936. There was a repeal of the voting rights that they already had. They took it back. So don't think they can't take it back, baby. Yeah, they can. They took back the voting rights for black natives. But guess what? They left the voting rights for the colored intact. you know, pitting one against the other, divide and conquer, which Cheeto Puff did very well during the election, pitting the brown against the black and the black jobs and the brown this and Latinos for Trump and all this crap. Okay, 1948, let's move on up, right? Let's go a little bit. In 1948, there's the National Party of South Africa. And here's where I take Kendrick Lamar's "They Not Like Us, But They Really Are" and flip it on its head. This National Party of South Africa is extremely religious. They believe that it's their God-given right to own South African land, all of it. They believe they're superior. Yeah. They believe that only racial purity will protect their rights. Now, here in America, we are having this white nationalist movement. We're even sucking up evangelicals in the movement. Of course, real evangelicals would never even consider the movement, but there are some that are just, you know, sucked right on up in there and feel like God is in the plan with Cheeto Puff, and he survived 2 assassination attempts, and he's destined to be Big Daddy and all this kind of stuff. You feeling me? And so that's exactly what was happening in 1948. And they took it so serious, hear me clearly, they took it so serious that they created a structure, a governmental policy, laws, and they implemented apartheid. It was in 1948 that we got that terminology, apartheid. What does it mean? Apart or separate. So there we go in 1948 for years doing black bathrooms, black trains, white trains, black schools, white schools, blah, blah, blah. They called it non-white. We saw the reservations be designated, that little small 8% of the land be designated for the different tribal sects. We saw that they started having to have their ID on them 24/7, sort of like real ID compliant, you know. They started having to, you know, you couldn't really go and be in nobody else's neighborhood, not in my neighborhood, without your ID and your permission card or whatever, your passport or whatever. So you were really, really, really being monitored, really, to make sure that you don't step out of line and come all the way over here unless you're working for us. Yeah. Now, the reservations, that the land that was set aside for the people in South Africa, the native blacks, don't get it twisted, honey. No, this was no Taj Mahal. They had no plumbing, no electricity, no drainage systems, no sewage systems, just really substandard housing. You already knew that. The schools, same thing. Less money was sent to their schools, and the schools were very segregated with less funding, sort of like how they're getting rid of the Department of Education here in America. Yeah, so they had the segregated schools, but it's even deeper than that. The black natives were not allowed to get a higher education. So there's no lawyers, doctors, nurses. No, they weren't allowed to get a higher education. In fact, the government controlled what they were taught, and what they were taught was geared towards making them a worker in the mine. Yeah, it's not like they were taught like Anne Frank's diary, or they weren't like allowed to read anything like I don't know, anything with Rosa Parks in it. And like, they couldn't really look at like Malcolm X and get to know that whole thing, or study the Black Panther movement or any of that. Oh, I'm sorry. I get my time frames mixed up. That's actually America. I did say they are like us, right? Not like us, but really they are. Because they were, you know, government sanctioned teaching what they could teach. Only thing they could learn or teach. And then here we are right now. Yes, we are. In fact, You may not know it, but Georgetown University was threatened by our deputy prosecutor that if they're teaching DEI, all federal money will be taken from them. And as if that wasn't bad enough, Georgetown University, now, like we're talking now, this month, this week, Georgetown University was also told that if they are teaching and they continue to teach diversity, equity, inclusion, that their law students would never be hired by the federal government. Like they threatened them with that. You know, diversity, equity, inclusion, the new N-word. Yeah, that's what it is. You knew that. But let's make sure that you understand what we're really saying. So if you're really not for diversity, then you damn sure probably are for segregation, because aren't these opposites? Yeah. Remember homonyms? Yeah, opposites. So the opposite of diversity is segregation. The opposite of equity is inequity. Yeah, discrimination. The opposite of inclusion is exclusion. So, you know, I suppose if you're not about DEI, you are for segregation, inequity, and exclusion. And that sounds just like racism. Jim Crow 2.0. Yeah. All right. So as we move along, there was no interracial marriage. White race was superior. We don't want to dilute it or contaminate it. Remember Cheeto Puff said that at a rally, that their blood is contaminating our blood. Remember? Y'all better stay focused. Now, the whole divide and conquer had the whites getting 86% of the land. There was at that time, 4 designated races, okay? We had the white, which made up 15% of South Africa, the Indian and the colored, which were small, tiny amounts of people population-wise. And then we had blacks that made up 80%. So you have the blacks making up 80% of South Africa, owning 8% of the land. Oh, they are so like us, okay? Now, they even passed laws that only their language could be spoken. So this whole native tongue, you know, that blacks were talking, now we're not doing that. You know, Cheeto Puff did that the other day. Yep, made English the only official language of the government and took all the Spanish conversion away from the internet of the government policies and different sites. Yep, sure did. Okay, now, in the 1950s through the 1970s, there, of course, were many protests. And what did you have at this point? Just like us in America, you had television. You had an awareness on an international basis that this horror stuff was going on and this discrimination and racism was going on. The United Nations is taking note of what's going on. You had Nelson Mandela as the leader of the movement until he was arrested in 1962 and served 27 years in prison. He was given a life sentence, so it gets better. In 1960s, those peaceful protests that they were trying to implement, they had one really, really, really big, fabulous, peaceful protest in Sharpeville in South Africa. Sharpeville ended up in a massacre where blacks were killed and slaughtered. Yeah, that kind of stuff. They're just like us with Selma. You guessed it, because you do know your history. Yep, so there's Sharpeville in South Africa where there's a massacre, and there is Selma where they beat the crap out of us. Peaceful protests. In the 1980s, things got a lot more violent. In fact, this was the most violent years of the whole movement, and it garnered international attention. And then countries and companies and corporations started divesting their funds from South Africa. In other words, we're not going to do business with you if you keep this crap up, okay? So it's putting economic pressure on South Africa to change their evil ways. And so then you have the election of a much more moderate president, and he lets Mandela out of jail in 1990. And 1994, Nelson Mandela is president, and compromises and bipartisanship and all this other stuff starts taking over. Now, again, it's just like us. The thing about it, though, is we are seeing this play out in American politics. We are seeing where Cheeto Puff, the first day or two of office, blamed us for planes falling out the sky. We have seen where he's suing, the attorney generals under him are suing stores like Costco or investigating them for DEI practices. We have seen the book bans in America, and we have seen even today, there's a teacher in Arkansas that all she did was say, everyone is welcome. And she had that very common, I've seen it myself, poster with every color little hand up on the poster, like all are welcome. And there was all color hands. She was chastised for doing that in Arkansas. She was. It's just a poster in her room, for crying out loud. We are seeing the Black Lives Matter Plaza in Washington, D.C. Mayor Bauer was threatened that if she doesn't totally demolish that beautiful plaza with gold Black Lives Matter lettering that is all through the plaza saying Black Lives Matter, that I personally marched on Juneteenth of 2020. If she doesn't personally get that stuff out of there and demolish that Black Lives Matter Plaza and rename it Liberty Boulevard, she will not receive any money from the feds. Now think about it. Washington, D.C., where Black Lives Matter's Plaza is not a state. No, they are the District of Columbia, and they depend on Congress for all their money. So poor Mayor Bauer, right? Yeah, and so we're also seeing where schools are being told and companies are being told to publish their anti-DEI policies. We are seeing where housing is harder to come by. We are also seeing where the stock market is going crazy, almost like they're planning on a recession. I hope not, but seems to be. They don't care if there is one. And that's kind of scary because we know during a recession, Blacks are always going to get hit the hardest. In fact, we know that with Elmo and these guys down there with their Project 2025, when he got access to all of our personal information, that meant that he also has access to demographics. Where do you live? What color are you? What age are you? Are you disabled or not? He's all up in them pies, baby. And so we are always going to be the quick to fire, slow to hire, first to fire, last to hire. And so I need you to stay with me because I am trying to educate you where this all came from and where we're going. We are headed towards Jim Crow 2.0 and we're getting there real fast. So deuces, I hope this helps because you guys asked, what's apartheid? And now you know. Deuces.